Cashiers of Reddit, what's been the most interesting reaction you've experienced when someone's gotten their card declined? I was 16 years old, working for minimum wage at the Jesus Chicken restaurant. A guy and his daughter came in, and she was in a gymnastics uniform. They order, and she starts telling me all excited about how every time she has an out-of-town competition, they try the local chicken chain together. Their total was only $16, but his card declined. He pulled out a second, but it declined too. She looks disappointed and tells me to cancel the order, but it was only $16, so I run to the back and grab my own card and run it through. They get their food, and he lingers behind to thank me and tells me that he's going through a divorce and they probably wouldn't have gotten to continue their tradition if I hadn't stepped in. I felt good doing something for someone without expecting anything in return. But, to my surprise, right at closing that night, my manager comes to the back and says someone is asking for me. The guy came back and gave me $30 and thanked me for making his daughter's day. Edit. Since a lot of people seem to have questions about the money and/or validity of this event, I'd like to address them. 1. My card was a debit, not credit. Don't know why that matters. 2. When the guy came back at closing to give me the money, he had plenty of cash on him. My guess is he had it back at his hotel. 3. He thanked me for making his daughter's day because he'd been going through a rough divorce and his soon-to-be ex had most likely canceled his cards, and he had been pulling stunts like that a lot. Hence the backup stash of cash. 4. I paid for the food instead of having them come back because my parents had been talking about paying things forward in our family, and I wanted to do something nice for someone else. Besides, it was only $16. 5. Jesus Chicken, Chick-fil-A people. Number 2. I was moving from Tennessee back home to Ohio. I had my entire life in my car and it got towed in the college town I made a stop in to have lunch with a friend. I had $100 to get home. It costed me $120 to get my car out. My friend covered the $20, but I only had half a tank of gas to get home. I was counting change at the gas station I stopped at, needed about $10 to get home, I believe, and started crying and having a panic attack. Went to the bathroom and came back. The cashier told me the guys behind me filled up my tank and to have a safe trip home. More crying, and it was just a really good feeling to know that there are decent humans in the world. Number 3. I had a customer that was yelling in multiple languages in my lobby, demanding a refund onto his gift cards. We had already made his drinks, but he said it took too long. Smoothie shop midsummer, it's gonna take a bit anyways. The guy wouldn't stop yelling. Was trying to take other customers' smoothies to replace his, even though his were in his hands all good. After trying to convince him that I absolutely cannot give him a refund on the gift card without the actual gift card and number, he finally walked up to the register, deliberately knocking over 2 stanchions with the guided rope between them. Then proceeded to flick the 2 gift cards at me, both missing and going over my shoulder. The craziest part is, in the end, he actually didn't pay on the gift cards. He paid in cash, wanted to refund these smoothies on the non-reloadable gift cards, but also to keep the smoothie. At this point, I went to hand him back the cards. He dropped his smoothie, one was mostly gone, and kept the other, and just walked out the door. Left $50 in gift cards. Utterly astounding interaction. Number 4. Several years ago, day after Christmas at Target, woman has 3 carts full of marked down Christmas merchandise. My scanner was broken, so had to hand type each UPS code in by hand. Needless to say, it took a while. The customer snottily complains about how much I was inconveniencing her by taking so long. Finally finish ringing her up her purchases and she hands me a card. Declined. She had me run it again. Declined again. Sighing outrageously, she pulls out her wallet and flips it open. I swear the woman had like 20 credit cards. She starts wiggling her fingers over them like she's picking a tarot card. Hands me a new card to me. Declined. Another card. Declined. Has me try several cards more. All declined. Finally, super pissed, she writes me a check in mounting glee. I tell her it's declined also. She slams her front cart away and stomps out to the exit. Lady behind her asks if her items are up for grabs. I say yeah, and proceed to watch as a horde of people ravage the contents of the carts. It was awesome. Like watching sharks eat chum. If I was this guy, the only thing I would have said is after all her cards declined, I would have been like, ma'am, you're really inconveniencing me by taking so long, and watch her explode. I don't care if I get fired. Customer service sucks. I used to work it, by the way, so I relate to a lot of these stories. But anyway, let's continue. Number 5. Not necessarily a bad customer behavior story, but one that I'll share anyway. I was a cashier at a chain hardware store, the big orange one. A mom, dad, and a few kids, all in ill-fitting clothing but pleasant as all get out, come up to the register and look like they're having a rough day. They have 3 full carts of merchandise, all basic stuff, one of everything you would need if you were moving out or starting from scratch. toilet paper, cleaning supplies, mop, broom, light bulbs, carts full of just everything you can imagine. I ask them, "You guys moving to a new place?" The mother says, "Actually, our house burned down." I apologized for their circumstances and continue to ring up their items. The total ends up over $1,000. I run their card, and it's declined. At this particular department store, you're allowed to discount a total of up to $50 without manager approval. So I do that, and it's still declining. The parents look like they are at a complete breaking point, but are taking it so gracefully for a family with 3 kids who just lost everything. The mom tears up and starts calmly making decisions about what to put back. I asked them to hang tight, pulled the manager aside, and explained the situation. The manager and I walk back to the family, and they are still eliminating things. And my manager took 50% of the entire transaction, then added a 10% senior discount and a 10% military discount on top of everything. The card then worked, and they were incredibly grateful and nearly in tears as I bagged everything up. I'll never forget how awesome that manager was. I didn't even really have to explain anything after. I said, "So their house burned down," and she immediately jumped into action to show some compassion. I'm not crying, you're crying. Anyway, let's continue. 6. Back in the 90s, I worked for Rumbelows. Had a guy pick out a new TV in VCR. Wanted warranty, nice easy sale. Trouble is, I noticed the signatures were a bit different, and in those days, anything over €100, you had to phone through authorization. So I did, and the card was stolen. Lady at the other end of the phone told me that I should stall the line as much as possible and keep the customer in the store as the police had been called. So I say to the guy, "Sorry, it seems that their system is playing up, so it's going to take a while for the authorization to come through." He seems fine with it. Waited and waited for what must have been 20 minutes. And another customer said, "You know what, mate? You're making it look like he's stolen that card." I told him that I was just told to wait for the auth code and that would take a while because their system yada yada yada. The card bearer pegged it out of the shop. I can now explain to the Good Samaritan that the card was stolen and in the nicest way possible that he was a jerk and should keep his thoughts to himself. Got paid €50 for the card. Handed it to the police who turned up 5 minutes after he'd bailed. Told them what he was wearing, but he was long gone. Number 7. Just the other day, I had a lady whose card got declined. Her response was to try it about 6 more times. Then it hit her. She works at a resale shop and had to use a big magnet for jewelry or something. She forgot to take her card out of her pocket, and long story short, she managed to demagnetize her card. Her solution was to run home and grab cash, which wouldn't have been a big deal except she ran her food stamp card first. And the register physically will not let me do anything except finish tendering. So I had to cash her out, return the non-food items, hold them until she got back, and re-ring them. And yes, she spent a good 5 minutes ranting about how I was conspiring against her until she figured out what had happened. Number 8. I once was standing in line behind a new Canadian whose card kept getting declined. It was almost closing time, and she was trying to buy diapers, baby food, and some regular groceries. She was panicked and insisted that there was a problem with the machine. The cashier at Safeway was being rude and condescending and insisted that there was nothing wrong with the machine. The line behind me was growing, and the cashier's attitude made me uncomfortable, so I offered to pay. She said she had money, but I insisted it wasn't a problem. Her items fell just short of $50. We added my items to her transaction, and I paid with my debit card. I was there long enough to hear the transaction behind me get declined. Then the cashier said something like, "Oh, that's right, credit cards are down right now." Bro, what? We need to find this cashier and point and laugh at him. Let's not do physical violence just yet, but we need to yell at this man. What a jerk. This poor lady coming to a new country. How rude. Anyway, let's continue. Number 9. Back in the mid-90s, often you would have to call in a credit card, dial in the number and expiration date and the amount over a phone. If it was declined, there was no additional information. So I was working at a Walgreens that never closed. The crap that is sold at a drugstore is pretty impressive. The customers are captive for half an hour and the practical items are few and far between. So the store sold toilet piggy banks and fake-mounted deer heads and extendo grabbers that couldn't actually grip. So this family comes in and loads up 2 shopping carts late at night just before Christmas. I rang up the items again and the card was still declined. This repeated until there was a pile of rejects and a pile of still once. The still once pile got smaller and the rejects pile got bigger. They were dejected and humiliated until it finally went through. I think that this was their Christmas and they waited on a card to come, but the line was not for the amount they wanted. They were stuck with picking out their gifts for each other among overpriced crap. I spent the rest of my shift putting the entire rejects pile away. Number 10. I'm not a cashier, but I had an interesting encounter with such a situation while I was in a line at Chipotle once. It wasn't a very crowded night, maybe 4 or 5 people in the whole place, and I'm in line making my order as a very tall, slick, and ridiculously shredded black dude is paying for what looks to be 4 or 5 different orders. It caught my eye because the total ended up being like $50, and I thought to myself, dang, I wonder how often someone spends $50 here. Anyway, he hands over the card and it declines. The cashier is just some teenage high schooler who feels obliged to try again because it must not be reading it correctly. She scans it once more with a pretty frantic look in her eye and hands it back saying that she thinks it's being declined. I think the cashier and myself were both absurdly surprised when the guy takes the news completely in stride, tells her it's not a problem at all, and proceeds to pull out a wad of cash from his pocket. All Benjamins. I'm talking easily $8,000 to $10,000 just in the guy's pocket, maybe even more. Probably a similar amount in his other pocket. Hands her a single $100 bill and tells her she can just toss the card. Does anybody want to be this guy's friend for absolutely no particular reason whatsoever at all? I'll even go to the gym with him. Let's bench, squat, let's go, leg day. Continuing. Number 11. This lady comes through my line early Christmas Eve, as in before 9 a.m. She's got well over $300 worth of stuff. She pays with a couple of gift cards and then her debit card. The card is not approved, but it's the "you've got no money" declined. She tries again and gets the same message. She asks me to suspend and she'll come back within 30 minutes with another card. About 15 minutes later, she comes back. She said she went out to the car and called her husband and found out the account was suspended. Since the bank wasn't open, they couldn't do anything. She had $30 in cash plus the gift cards, so she whittled the order down to where she could pay. As she was doing this, she explained it was good news and bad news. The bad news was that the account was suspended because of a large purchase from the day before. The good news was that it was her husband buying her Christmas gift. She left with a big smile. 12. This happened to me and I was mortified. In my defense, it wasn't declined due to lack of funds/available credit. I went to Nordstrom's or Macy's to pick up a few items for a holiday. I think the item in question was a purse for my mom. It wasn't expensive, but it wasn't cheap either, like $250 to $300. I had placed the order online for pickup in store. Walk in, talk to the lady, got the item, and go to the register. We try to run my card, bam, declined. What? She runs it a few more times, and still declined. I'm confused and a little embarrassed at this point. I call my bank, Wells Fargo, and ask them what is going on and why they can't push through the charge. They claimed the one I had expired. I read the expiration back to them and told them it was perfectly fine. It wasn't until later that the real story came out. Apparently, they detected fraud somewhere in my account, but no actual charge fraud, and decided to cancel my card and issue a new one. They did so without notifying me. They also said since it was a fraud hold, they couldn't push this transaction through, even not on a one-time exception. I had to sullenly tell the teller that I would be back tomorrow. It was close to closing time for them. She gave me this look like I wasn't going to be back. That probably hurt the most. But I went back the next day and I bought the ever-living hell out of that purse. 13. On the receiving end, I was working in construction pretty far from home, and for lunch, I went to get an $8 custom sandwich from a fancy grocery store. At the register, my card got declined, and when it did, I immediately checked my phone and saw I had a $0 balance. I told the lady, sorry, I can't pay for this, and she said, wait, hold on, and called a few people over, and she ended up paying it for me. I still remember her face. I tried to pay her back after my next pay, but she said, no, I don't want it. I like to help, and I imagine other people will do the same. I will never forget her. She turned what would be a depressing day into something I will never forget. 14. Late to the party, but this one was pretty heartwarming. A woman came through with a bag of dog food, some clothes, and a bit of makeup. The total was probably about $120 US. I run her card and it declines, so she asks if I could take the makeup and clothes off. Tried to run it again and it still declines. She broke down crying, saying she didn't deserve the affection of her dog and that she was a horrible person because she couldn't even afford a $20 bag of food to feed him. Clearly, she had a bit of a rough patch going on. So, the dude behind her in line asks me what's the largest quantity of dog food we sell is and where it is in the store. I tell him the size and location. He tells the woman to wait and comes back with two 50-pound bags of dog food over his shoulder. Dude sets it on the belt, buys it, and the clothes and makeup. Woman proceeds to cry harder and thanks him profusely, hugging him and kissing him on the cheek. Dude says it's not a big deal, that he was just recently out of a situation like that, so he understood. A lot of terrible people come through retail, but witnessing little moments like this made it bearable. 15. This will get buried, but I need to tell it. I worked in ski school sales for a major resort for a season. So, surprise, surprise, turns out a bunch of rich jerks like to ski, or learn to ski at least. Towards the end of the season, a fairly normal guy comes in and he is signing up his girlfriend for lessons. We get everything going and he hands me his card. Well, I felt that large metallic card and that could only be one thing: a dang black Amex card. For those that don't know, they are larger in metal. They also mean that you have screw you money. Someone bought a freaking jet with one. Anyways, I had already seen a few of these over the course of the season. Rich people, remember? Well, there are two types that live in resort towns: people with 2 houses or people with 2 jobs. And if you have 2 jobs, you barely make ends meet while living with 5 people and sleeping in a dining room. Oh, sorry. Anyways, I had seen a few, so I wasn't surprised, but this guy looked cool enough. It was at the end of the year, so I swiped it, clicked my fingers on the table with a puzzled look. Slowly made eye contact with him while passing his card back to him, saying, "Sir, I'm terribly sorry, but your card has just been declined." After the most hilarious look of confused frustration and pure bamboozlement, he managed a barely audible whisper of, "The fuck?" before I smiled and said, "Just kidding, man." He was a great sport, gave me a pat on the shoulder while laughing his ass off and saying how well I had gotten him.